So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find then the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end, and per the prophecies of the scripture from the original manuscript of the set apart, we find then during this time of restoration and reduction, restoration because Yirmiyahu the prophet, the 61st chapter, is stated, and the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries, then they would return. So then, understanding from the time of the Messiah himself, when he was then completing the spring feast, he was then speaking of a layer of understanding related with the 24th chapter of Yirmiyahu. So why do we read then the spring feast per the order of then Yohanan first, and then Yirmiyahu, and then the Gentile Gospels? Because Gospels, they don't exist. What does exist is the spring feast. So you read the spring feast from Yohanan, then you read the spring feast from Yirmiyahu, then you read the spring feast from the viewpoint of two Gentiles. So this was and is the proper way of reading it. Why do we read then Yohanan first? Because Yohanan was with the Messiah ever since the Messiah started his ministry, or then the completion of the spring feast. You find him at first, you find him at last. He was taken through the entire understanding of the prophecies. You find Yohanan then during the time of the Messiah's completing of the spring feast. You find him during the time of the first holy city. So Yohanan was during the entire time observing the Messiah. He then observed the transitional time. He then observed the entire understanding until he was in the first holy city, delegating responsibilities from the Messiah himself. Extremely important. He was also on Mount Gerizim with the Messiah, as the scripture then testified, and there was there on the mountain the Messiah himself, and then it was Yaakov and Yohanan. Besides then, obviously, Shimon. And then was also there, Moshe showed up, and also Eliyahu representing then the prophets. So then we find the entire understanding then from a very realistic viewpoint. Yohanan, Yirmiyahu, then you find extra filtering. The Creator is absolutely amazing. It was filtered through the very person knowing tabernacling. Yirmiyahu was a Levite, very acquainted with the scripture. So then afterwards you find a couple of viewpoints of Gentiles. So then, during this time where we study then the prophecies of Daniel, then Daniel must be studied at two levels. First level, obviously, tabernacling. Second level, Gentile. Why should we then understand the level of the Gentiles? Because the Ishmaelites were then the first son, came from the lineage of the first son. So always we must have simultaneously understanding those two levels. Never separated, always united. So then, we read from Daniel the politician. Then you read Daniel the prophet. If you mix those, you get the whole understanding screwed up. Have this in mind. The set apart language is a holy language. is the very language of the Creator of the heavens and the earth. There is no language that can compare with it, similar with it, near with it, or even close as much as you can think of in your own earthly mind of some sort of a nearing calculation of your own. It's a language absolutely perfect, absolutely exact. There is no word exchange. Each word has a specific understanding. So then we can't make a word for a couple of understandings. The language of the set apart is then the language of the Creator. There is no exchanging of words. So then, during our quest of understanding this time of the end, because relates with the Creator, the Messiah, mostly because the 1,000 years of deceit is gone. So devil no longer exists. So let's then evaluate the many names of Nahashatan or Lucifer. Then became Satan or adversary, or Nahashatan, known as the serpent, or adversary serpent. Each of those names of him has a specific understanding. We can't mix those. So devil no longer exists. As per the times and the seasons, no longer exists. Because the Creator is so perfect when He made the earth and the times and the seasons. We must continuously update our data, make sure then we understand the perfect intricacy of the holy language. So when you hear devil, you can understand there is a big question mark. He doesn't exist. Because we are during the time of the dragon. It's no longer deceit. So then, when we read Daniel the politician, what has he stated? When we read the 11th chapter, we are reading level of the Gentiles, where you then link no longer devil but dragon. When you read Goliath the 20th chapter and the many statements of his name, for instance, destroyer, devil, dragon, serpent, Nahashatan, each of those they have a specific understanding. During the time of the restoration after 2009 until prior of the starting of the autumn feast, then his title is dragon. We are during the time of the dragon, where you find then high levels of knowledge and precision. But since we are not speaking of the Holy Tabernacling, in the world the dragon rules, liking it or not. Because God has saved us from the dragon and the devil. No. It doesn't work that way. You have to understand first the level of Gentile and then tabernacling. We are outside of tabernacling. The world is ruled by the dragon. At the moment, the dragon rules. When we find then the Chinese system coming, then you understand, it gives you a hint. Chinese dragon. As much as we can disdain the Chinese, and a lot of us do, we tend to be condescending upon other nations. They have the precision of the dragon. Sometimes we complain the quality is not that great sometimes, but it is inexpensive. However, they have the precision of the dragon. But we, our nations, we are clinging yet of the 1,000 years of deceit. Sometimes not because of our own makings, because we were born during the time of deceit. Why then deceit? Because there is no longer tabernacling. Every time the planet is absent from tabernacling, the whole world becomes deceit. Instantly. While the Creator was in charge of the Holy of Holies, the world then had organization. Then came His Son, had taken over His place. Then 1,000 years, there was a transitional time. Then, transitional time was during the time of the 1,000 years of the Messiah. Then came the first holy city. And then until 1009, there was organization in the earth. Afterwards, had no more tabernacling, time of deceit. Time of deceit is gone. 2009 is gone, and we are behind schedule 40 years. That's a long time. The Creator is very magnanimous, because 40 years, when we understand the expiring of the prophecy, where the Messiah gave 2 Yom creation days to the Samaritans, 50:32, 70:32 is the maximum of the prophecy. So we are 40 years behind schedule. 2009 ended deception, deceit. No longer devil. It is dragon. Later, when the sound of the shofar starts, then it changes. Up to the moment when then the cities are then active, and when the atomic blast takes place, then is no longer dragon but destroyer. So then it's very important, as Shaliach Shaul said, in terms of then times and seasons, he would not have to expand the understanding or then explain the times and the seasons when he was explaining the instructions. Because he was speaking with the set apart, very acquainted during the time he was teaching. But during our time, where the world came out of a long time of deceit, we must reacquaint ourselves how it was during the time of Yohanan. So we are during the time of the period of dragon. So if you say devil, then you are not very smart. Because deceit was then done away with. From 1009 to 2009 was the time given for deceit, where even the scoundrelized scripture was then generated. But when we read from the holy manuscripts, we begin to understand then the shadow prophetic events of the instructions. And the Messiah never would then give license to sin to any person. So then, reading from the politician Daniel, he explains then the statue in the second chapter. Then you find the explanation of the relationship of those many kinds of metals until it reaches the base. Afterwards, there is a vision of the Ancient of Days and throne. Speaks of then judgment. Speaks of the vengeance. And there is a section then given for the time of restoration. Because the only section not explained was then the base of the statue, where iron does not mix with clay. And it must be explained because there is a movement of kingdoms where they must relate with each other. Namely then the kingdom of the north, we understand Soviet Union. And the kingdom of the east, China. And the south, Africa. Africa is the birthing yet. Africa is birthing itself. Africa is extremely rich, but requires tabernacling. Otherwise the nation destroy itself, or then the nation is speaking of the entire continent. Kingdom of Africa, they have their own kingdom. So then, these particular places of the earth, they have the last say-so until the second son then have relationship with the first son. Where then you begin to understand then how then the Ishmaelites are going to be relating with the most influential decisions amongst the nations. And then tabernacling develops itself until lastly then Israel is saved. As far as until there is a relationship with the second and first son, there are only the first, second, and third kingdoms with the saying so. Namely then Soviet Union, China, and Africa. The rest of the world should take care of their own. Do what the Messiah said. Taxes. Give to the government what belongs to the government. And give God what belongs to God. The decisions thus far, they are related with these areas of the world. Particularly, they are not in order. For instance, Soviet Union or China, or then Africa, or Africa, China and Soviet Union, or vice versa. But the rest of the world should line up their agendas with these first, second, and third kingdoms. So then we can expect 100% the euro breaking, no question about it. As far as the euro must be broken. Not because a person is against it, but because the system is coming. The Chinese system is coming through and is going to become then a reference point from nation and nation and nation and nation, and it's going to force out the subsystem out of the way. Why? Because the subsystem becomes imbalanced. Now, speaking in human terms, we are speaking then the areas of the clay mixed with iron. There is a reason why then the Creator decided some nations would be iron, some nations would be clay. What can we understand from tabernacling perspective? Some nations are ethical and they know how to control themselves. Some nations, they are unethical and they don't know how to handle themselves. And those nations, as portrayed as clay, they don't know how to handle themselves. When they get some funding, the first action of these clay nations, obviously, it is the investment. And they are not going to pay their dues. It's normal when you understand what it means, clay. Causes imbalance in the system. It forces the subsystem out of the way. Precisely what Daniel, the politician, said. Then we can expect the United Kingdom also in the path of division. Not because somebody says so. It's because the system coming is going to force out then the uniting part of these realms. So then the world then is obviously organizing itself for the autumn feast. The whole objective of the entire world is lining up itself for the autumn feast. No other nations thus far they have the say-so other than those first, second, and third kingdoms. Those are it. They make the decisions. Until the relationship of the second son and the first son then established, then there is a fourth component. And then later comes then the autumn feast. So what are the expectations of the future? Then you can expect the euro breaking and the United Kingdom dividing. You can expect internet privacy acts refurbished or then reevaluated. Why? Because when the system comes, you have to have a financial institution to get your funding from whatsoever place you have at. Then you're going to make a transfer. If those financial institutions are untracked from the perspective of the new system, then there is no way of tracking it. And the only way from the perspective of the new system is then taxation. This means movement of funding from many kinds of financial institutions where the government then taxes. And you can understand this factor. When the system comes, what it takes is only a transfer. Then the entire funding of each individual or companies, those are then secured. Because the system is related with a military or a militarized system of a socialist government, extremely organized. You won't be tampering with the new system. The dragon won't let you. If you try to hack into this system, you may die. So there is a spiritual protection in whatever level you can think of. Don't think of tabernacling. We're speaking straight Gentile level. Some people don't understand what it means, but take it from what the scripture states. The reference is Galah 1:8, where then you understand the freighters of the earth being in charge, because the dragon is in charge. No person on the planet is going to ever hack into the system. So the only section of it, rather than dealing with death, is then obviously finding ways of tracking the funding outside of the system. Taxation. Because when the system comes, you can make purchases, you can do investments, and many other actions via the system, and those must remain untracked. Your trust, your reliability, you as being then a responsible person must maintain it in a specific level. Always positive. That's why you find in the Asia market always positive. As far as we can understand, in any area, you can absolutely be sure of it. A reform of the privacy rights. It's an ultimate must in every nation of this planet. Responsible nations should taking care of then their backlogs. They should make sure that expenses are under the control. They must make sure their subsystem then is absolutely clean and in working condition, so they can balance the budget. If they don't do these, they are ruined. They may have to adopt directly the Chinese system as the basis of the nation. More than likely, this is what's coming for ours, or for our nation, because we have no control over the government, and the government is bankrupt. Without exact taxation, precisely as the Messiah has said, we are a bankrupt nation. As if we, in this country, we were on the Titanic, proud of its sinking. We are precisely on those moments. The Messiah is, in quotes, saying, patch up the side of the ship what is damaged, because the ship is going to sink. The patching up of the side of the ship is instant taxation. The Messiah was not playing jokes. And other than those first and second kingdoms and first, second, and third kingdoms, besides those, there is no say-so in the world. We, United States, last year, we had a huge chance of making a deal with the Chinese in order for them then to start taking over portions of the world and start doing patrols. We didn't do it. We decide to purchase the war from Israel and Palestine. So we got ourselves further into debt, and we lost a saying so amongst those nations. Then we take a trip over there. The president had dragged himself over there, and then we ended up nearly having war with Iran. Imagine how unhealthy our country's way of thinking is. Not only this, but then there is a problem with North Korea. If we had taken the understanding from last year and having then a deal with the Chinese where they would start their patrols, and also the system then being indicated as then trade, working with those people to do trade, we would have protected ourselves from North Korea. Because believe it or not, North Korea is part of the Asian market. Like it or not. We would have refrained ourselves from further troubles. No, but we then didn't do it. We decided to go in our own blind ways, and there it is. We have a problem with Iran, and we have a problem now with the North Koreans for no reason. And we are not taxing. And the government is going wallowing around. And like it or not either, our nation has no world to say a word. Regarding military, regarding trade, or any other area. The only objective for America is taxation. Do what the Messiah said to do. That's the only objective. If we don't do this, later we have to adopt the Chinese system as a means of country's government. The freighters, they are not going to take charge of our country. They don't want the responsibility of taking care of the burden of the country, for instance, paying the federal people. How are the freighters of our country going to pay for the federal workers? The freighters, they don't want the debt of the government. This country was never unkind, but certainly is badly managed. And until the Messiah indicates this nation, America, won't say a word until the time comes. The Messiah was not playing jokes. Only because we don't understand the holy works of tabernacling does not mean that those situations do not take place. We are from a nation and barely over 200 years old. Only the set-apart training was more than 1,000 years. 5 times more. And we think we can be wiser? No, in fact, we are truly stupid. Not unkind. Because we did not do what the Messiah told us to do. So lots of developments going on around the world. Last night, great news from the great continent of Africa, where then the president of China, Xi Jinping, was there speaking with the financial person of South Africa. They made very important moves as far as mining, as far as energy, as far as banking. And then the president of China visited with Vladimir Putin from the Northern Kingdom. They have great relationship. They are in charge of the G20, of the BRIC, Brazil, Soviet Union, and then India, China, and then South Africa included. In our country, America, wallowing around, wallowing around, wallowing around, wallowing around, wallowing around. Because we were handed down deceit, and this country has only a bit over a couple hundred years of age. So let's understand the time of restoration and reduction, but make sure from the level of Gentiles, our objective in America is instant taxation system. Do what the Messiah said. Give to the government what belongs to the government. Pay your taxes. It does not mean you are not going to have cash in your hand where you go into your neighbors and you buy then a pair of pants and you don't pay tax. Come on, don't be ridiculous. We are speaking of a government level of taxation because of the high level of knowledge, so then we can line up with what the politician Daniel has stated. Knowledge would increase, obligating the country to do absolute exact standards of taxation. And where do you find these exacting standards of taxation? When do you begin to understand the freighters? Labeling.